Hello everyone, welcome to Just a Gearhead. In today's episode we're going to try again to fix the shifter on this 77 Century. Stay tuned. Alright, so like I said, today we're going to try to fix the shifter handle on the 77 Century. I got some parts, so hopefully they're the right ones. I'll show you guys right now. Last time the stuff I got at the swap meet did not work, so this time I found a website that had parts listed for 77 Buicks, specifically the Regals actually, which are basically the same body style, so hopefully this all fits. So it's got the basically like the stand, the uprights, so to replace these, and there's little bars that slide inside these that move a bar that locks out the gears. So we got that. We got a new handle, and then this part is a little chrome piece that goes in the slot of the handle. Now what they didn't have was one of these. So this is actually the one that was broken that I repaired. I'm starting with the two pieces that were left over from the previous shifter. I'm just lining them up to make sure that they're going to fit together nicely. I then sanded the inside part of the piece. There's a little groove in there because I'm going to be filling that up with epoxy. Next, I took a piece of popsicle stick and measured and trimmed to make it fit in the center. First I cut one end off, and then I slid it in. It's a nice snug fit, and then I measured roughly to figure out how much I needed to trim off the other end to make it fit inside the groove and to have the pieces line up with each other. I'm just using some JB Weld clear two-part epoxy. Said it was pretty good for plastic, so just squeezed out a couple of gobs and then gave it all a good mix, making sure the two parts were well mixed together so that it'll harden up nicely. If you don't mix them together all the way, sometimes you'll end up with spots that don't fully harden. I taped the two pieces together, and then I filled in the groove with as much epoxy as I could, and then slid the popsicle stick inside the groove, and then a little extra epoxy just to make sure. Once the epoxy was dry, I peeled the tape off the outside of it. The epoxy had stuck to the tape, so it was a bit of an effort to get it all off. Once I did finally get all the tape off of it, I gave it a quick sand using a sanding block with 220 sanding paper on it. After sanding it to shape, I test fitted it in the handle to make sure that it would slide in and out okay. Here I am using foil tape. You can find this in most heating departments in like Home Depot and Lowe's and that. It's used for taping ductwork. I use it on my model cars to replace chrome. It's nice and shiny. It's kind of thin, so it should work pretty good. I cut it a little extra long on the one way, and then I measured over to make sure I didn't need all of it and trimmed off the excess. Separating the foil from the paper backing can be a bit of a trick sometimes. The tip of the X-Acto blade helps get it started. Just don't poke yourself in the finger. It sucks. Once I got an end started, I peeled it back about halfway to reveal the sticky side. I then laid the part into it, trying to line up the edge with the back side, or the top side of the piece. And then I rubbed it down. The smoother you can get it, the better. You can see that the cracks still showed through a little bit. And then I peeled back and started folding it over the edges. And I continued to rub it with my fingers just to smooth it out the best I could. And then rolled it over the top of the piece. That way the edges are on the top and not on the sides where they might get caught. I then trimmed the ends, left just about a millimeter or so hanging over still, just so we can fold it over and once again have the ends on the flat part where they won't get caught on anything. And I rubbed it down a few more times just to try to smooth out any wrinkles or anything that might be left, to make sure that the edges are well seated. And then once again, I test fitted it into the handle to make sure that it wouldn't get stuck on the edges of the handle. Alright, so that's how I repaired this one. So hopefully it'll do the trick. This handle, it's kind of my fault, I guess, a little bit. When I was on the website, they had two types of handles for this setup. One was the sort of rough surface, kind of just little bumps or whatever, in black, and this one was a wood grain one, and the photo looked like it was black, but when it arrived it was brown, so I made it black. First I started off with some Rust-Oleum gray primer. I did sand the piece with some 400 grit sandpaper just to knock down some of the shininess and give the primer something to adhere to. I gave this a couple of quick coats just so that it had even coverage over the whole part. Next, I applied 2 coats, fairly heavy coats, of the Kona black paint from Rust-Oleum. I figured I might as well stick with the same brand of paints all the way through. Less chance of having issues. I then finished out by spraying on 2 fairly wet coats of Rust-Oleum Satin Clear. I wanted the satin finish, I didn't want a high gloss finish because I just figured it would look better for a shifter handle. So that's good to go now. Hopefully this will be strong enough to last, and we're going to see if we can make all this work. So yeah, first thing we gotta do is get the center console off again, and I'm gonna put a few extra parts in here again. Put those down there now. So this mounts this way. These go inside here, these little screws. And this bar will mount across here. And this is what locks out the gear so you can't shift without pulling the little trigger, which mounts to one of these little bars. Something like that. Alright, so it did come with screws, but I do think I found a couple of screws that should work. So I'll be right back. I'm thinking this one was actually on backwards, because it would make more sense to have it go here, because then there's a slot here. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a slot here that this bar would actually sit in and would land on the right spot. Okay, I'm pretty sure this one's on backwards, so we're going to take that off. And that actually makes sense too, because when I was shifting this before, when I pushed it all the way forward, it wasn't lining up with the park readout on the top. So that would make sense if this was in backwards. So, in that case, pretty sure that goes like there. Yeah, that makes more sense. But I think, yeah. Okay, so this slides through there, that through there. This little bar goes between them. Come in. Okay. There we go. This drops in like that. And then we'll try not to get stung by the wasp. Take a hike. There we go. I'll give you guys a quick shot of this because I don't think you can see from there. So here we are. So where did I put the old one? There it is. Okay. So this old one was sitting this way. I don't know if you can see the difference there. So it's basically turned. Pretty sure it was on backwards because this slide would not line up with this slot here. And they need to line up with this slot so that this bar can move up and down when you, because this trigger piece will be connected between the two of these. So you pull the trigger up, this bar lifts up and releases you off the notches for different gears here. And like I said, when I had pushed the handle all the way forward, or even when I was trying to line up gears, it never seemed to be lining up in the right spot. So I'm pretty sure that was on backwards, which probably a good thing to find out. Alright, so now this little handle has to go in like this, and then this handle goes over the top and screws it in here, and then this goes in the top of that little handle with these two springs. But this has to be like this so I can put the center console back in. The other shifter, the one from the swap meet, the handle didn't come out. It was like bolted together down here, and the center console came apart in the center so you could pull the whole unit out. So that's why it didn't work and why I couldn't make it work. But now that I got the parts, I can make this one work. So yeah, I'm going to go put you back over there and put this together. Just should be a few screws and whatnot after I put the center console on. These two springs should fit up in here on the tops of those little pegs on the trigger. And then this goes in over top. Problem is, I had this on there. One, I still haven't found a screw for this side. But two, for some reason this is all very stiff. And even with the springs in, it doesn't want to push the trigger back down. So, and I test fitted it before off the car, and it seemed fine. So it's something in to do with the handle and these brackets here, because I had to pound it on so hard. So something's too tight in there and it's not working quite right. So I'm gonna have to take it apart and see if I can figure out why it's getting stuck. What should have been a 30-minute job is going to take me half the day probably now. I think this is a tad too wide now. So I'm going to have to get a file and file these ends down. And I think that might solve my problem. So I sanded down the ends of this, so hopefully it'll fit better. So I think what's happening is this is a little narrower than the original one. And it's pulling these in and compressing on this, which is binding everything up. We're going to test that theory right now. I also tried to find some more screws in hopes that one of these will actually do the trick and hold this all together. These go on the little posts, so this should slide into here. These little hooks, I think they're supposed to end up in these little holes here, but I don't know if they will. Yay! Cool. It works, finally. So a job that should have took me, I don't know, half hour, took me an hour and a half because of wrong screws and this piece being slightly smaller than what it originally should be. But there, finally, the shifter is in and done. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.